Hi, here's Deb's mask. I started with the pattern that was featured on the New York Times. And the first thing I have to do is I make sure that the ends of my fabric are nice and even. So I've got a smooth line there. And this piece of fabric is about 20 inches wide, but I'm folding it over so that I don't have to cut such a long stretch. So I'm going to start with the ties. I'm going to use a 6 by 9 inch square over here that will be part of the face mask, but the ties, I've got to make sure I have long pieces. So I'm going to cut 4 pieces that are 1.5 inches wide. So this is doubled over. It's about 20 inches long from here to here, but I'm doubling it over to make it easier to cut. I have this tool here that gives me measurements right on my mat, and I'm going to cut 4 pieces that are 1.5 inches wide by about 20 inches long, but anything from 16 to 20 inches would probably work. So there's 1 tie, 1.5 inches wide, two ties, 3 ties, 4 ties. If you don't have a tool like this that's going to flatten your fabric while you cut, you might want to iron it a little bit first so it's not all bumpy and wrinkly. See how bumpy and wrinkly that is? But because I was flattening it, I wasn't worried about it. And I've got my iron ready for later. Okay, so I've got 4 ties. And I'm going to use 2 different colors. I'm going to use one for one side and one for the other. That's not required. You can make them both sides the same color. And now I need a piece that's 6 by 9. So it looks for me to get a piece of 6 by 9. I'm going to cut that from this fat part right here. And that doesn't look very even at the bottom. Let me take a look. It's kind of messy at the bottom, so I'm going to cut that off to make it even. I'll just trim that a little bit here so I have a nice even piece right there. All right, so I've got an even piece. I've got this fancy rotary cutter that makes my job really easy. So now I'm going to make it 6 inches high and 9 inches wide. So 6 inches. This is 6 inches high. I think I'm gonna make it from that side and not from this side. So 6 inches by 9 inches. So this is 6 inches this way, and I need 9 inches this way. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because I can't read those readings very well because the numbers are red on top of my red fabric. So now I'm going to go back here. There we go. 9 inches. And this is 6 inches. There's my one 6 by 9 inch piece of fabric. I need one more, and I'm going to use this color for the other side. When I'm cutting my fabric, I always want to use next to the edges and not sort of in the middle, because when I come back to this fabric, I want to have as much as possible to do something else fun and beautiful out of it. And I think I'll just cut my 6 by 9 right here. That looks pretty easy. So let's see. It's going to be. This is the, and I can see this is a straight line because this is the selvage. The selvage is the piece where actually it's not a selvage. It looks like a clean cut. This is the selvage over here. This is the part that's that came closed up. The nice smooth end from the manufacturer. All right, so now I'm looking for 6 by 9 again. Here's 6. That doesn't look perfectly straight on this edge, so I'm going to make it perfectly straight up there. I'm going to line this up over here. That's the advantage of having this tool, is I can line up my straight edges. Make sure my edge is straight. So now I have a straight edge. Okay, great. So now I'm going to go 6 and by 8, 9. This looks like 9. Still hard to read because that red is on top of this color. Okay, so I'm going to go. So now I have another 6 by 9 inch piece. All right, this is the boring part. Now I have to iron. I need to iron the ties. So I have a little ironing pad I made. So I can just iron right here on the counter. I just plugged in my iron so it could get hot. Should have done that when I got started. So here's my little ties. This is the worst part of the whole project, is ironing the ties. So 1.5 inches by whatever, 16 to 20, someplace in there. And I'm going to fold them in half first. I'm not going to use any steam on these because I've got my hand so close to the iron. And the iron will get hot, but I don't want it steaming out and burning my fingers. So I'm just using a hot, non-steaming iron to make a crease. Even though my iron's not real hot yet, because it's heavy, it's making a nice crease. Okay, I've got this in half. So now I take, and I like to take the top half. I'm folding the top half in so that this is hiding. So I'm going to fold this in just like this and iron this part in place. So I've folded this in half and ironed, and now I'm going to fold it, the top half in, so I've got it in quarters. So I'm folding the top half in, not quite to the pressed line I made, but most of the way to that pressed line. So I'm using that pressed line as my guide, and I'm just pressing. This is totally the hardest part, just pressing along here. I'm making it look easy because this is number 22 I've made, so I'm getting better at it. So I'm just pressing that in. And I don't like to do it this way. For some reason I found it easier to press the top in. So that's my MO. I can see what I'm doing best by ironing it sort of towards me instead of away from me. So I can see what I'm doing. I'm folding that top half in towards the middle. Now I've got this seam allowance here. I have two choices. I can just leave my seam allowance and have this funny white part poking out, which isn't so bad on this fabric because it's got a little hard, a little flower on it, or I can tuck that in. Let's see what the rest of the seam allowances look like. This one's just plain white, so that doesn't bother me. So I think I'm just going to leave the seam allowances on here, because this will make a really smooth folded edge when I'm done. Or I can tuck them on the inside if I want, but I'm going to make this raw edge inside the mask. And this will be my edge that hangs out, the seam allowance here where the selvage is. This is the selvage. Okay, I got to do 3 more of these. Iron, 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 really quick. Folding it in half. No steam on, so I don't burn my fingers. Folding it in half, folding it in half, folding it in half. Iron, iron, iron. Now I open it up, and I take the top part and fold it in so that the edge almost meets the fold, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Just not overlapping it, because then that'll make it hard for you to sew. So just almost touching. And then I'm just going to flip it over because I find that easier to go towards me than try to iron here and look away from me and see. I find it easier to come like this. It doesn't have to be perfect, But when you sew it, it's the easiest if you can just like hold it down together and scrunch it up. That's 2. Ooh, this one's really wrinkly. So this one I'm gonna have to iron flat for a second because it was on the fold of the fabric. So first thing, I gotta iron that flat. Okay, flat. Now I'm gonna fold it in half. Ooh, it's hot because the iron is hot. And this is a woven cotton fabric. Woven cotton fabrics are the ones that were recommended. This is actually also known as a quilting fabric because you can make pretty quilts with this. And that's why I had all these different kinds of fabrics hanging around, because I had purchased some little quilt bundles. I hadn't done anything with them, and then suddenly it's time to make masks, and I had all these pretty fabrics hanging around, waiting to be turned into masks. Not quite meeting the center line here, and just kind of eyeballing it. That's 3, and I got 1 more. Fold it in half, iron it in half, neat up those edges, open it up, top half coming in to meet the center fold.
It's getting hot. I guess we can do this.
Turn it over, top half coming in to meet the center fold. Okay. Time to sew.
What'd you say?
I said it's time
to sew.
Time to sew.
Excuse me.
All right. So I have some light gray thread in the machine, so I'm just going to stick with that. So I've got my 4 ties. I got time to sew the ties, and I'm going to start. Doesn't matter actually. I'm going to start when I do this. I'm using about 10 stitches to the inch, a straight stitch. I have my walking foot on. This actually helps hold cotton fabrics, but if you don't have one, a regular foot will fine. I don't have it right up to the edge. I have the edge of the tie under where my foot starts instead of out here where my foot, like this. I have it tucked under because that little bit of fabric on the end sometimes wants to get poked down in the hole. So I come out just like a stitch or 2 length, put my needle in, back up a couple, and keep going forward, because that's the trickiest part, is the beginning and the end. And then I just hold this carefully. See well enough what I'm doing. Try a little bit different angle. I'm just carefully folding those ends together so that the tucked in ends are going through the machine, and I'm just going about somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch from the outside edge. I don't want to go over the outside edge, and I want to catch in these parts that I just ironed together. So I want to catch those ironed ends, and I'm going to keep going. And if it's not perfectly straight, nobody's really going to notice. And when I get to the end, before I get all the way to the end, I'm going to do that back and forth thing. Okay, now I'm not even going to cut this off. I'm just going to feed the next one right in there. So I'm going to just push this up against that one and carefully, because having those two together keeps from eating the end of the piece of fabric when you start up. The back of the presser foot has got a little fabric, and the front of the presser foot has a little fabric, keeping it in balance and from eating, pushing down into that hole, the ends of the fabric. That's the hardest part. The sewing is making sure you don't eat up the end of the fabric and it gets shoved down in that little hole and then it looks all messy on the end. And I didn't change my thread to be red or white. I had this pale gray in here and I thought, well, that's probably going to look okay. And I'm actually really, I'm out of bobbin thread. So I'm actually really liking how that pale gray looks on here. So I ran out of bobbin thread, so I have to stop, thread my bobbin. Okay, that's always a hassle that happens in the middle of your project. Okay, I hope that will do it for the rest of this project. Now, when you start stitching again with new bobbin thread, there's a great opportunity not to have to go back and forth because the bobbin thread is connected to the thread on top of the machine. So I'm starting a new one instead of going back to that old one right now. So I can take advantage of the fact that I don't have to go back and forth here. I just have to get started because the back and forth is to keep the threads from unraveling, but they can unravel if they're attached to each other. You could pin this before you got started, but it's pretty easy to just mash it together, so I haven't pinned mine. When I'm getting to the end, I'm going to do that little back and forth, and shove the next one under here to get it going. Back and forth. Now I'm ready to roll. You could use elastic and skip this whole part, but I like the ties, and they don't hang on my ears the way elastic does. And, you know, the elastic's been hard to find lately. I do my back and forth before I get to the very end because at the very end it kind of wants to slip around. This time I am going to snip my threads, and then I'm going to go back to that one that I got stopped on because it happened in the middle of I lost my bobbin thread in the middle. So I'm going to go back to where my bobbin thread ran out, start right back there, do like 1 or 2 stitches back and forth. Okay, and I'm going to finish this little tiny bit up. Boy, I was awfully close to the end and I had to stop. You don't even have to stitch out all the way to the end because this part on this one end, the end that's not the selvage end or the finished end or the turned under end, depending on how you want to finish it, that part's going to be hiding inside the mask. I'm just going to clip these threads where I had to start sewing again, where I ran out of my bobbin thread. Snip, snip. Snip, snip. This one did something weird here. I'm going to have to clip that off. Snip, snip. Okay. Now you remember that I have these two ties together because I didn't stop. So before I do anything else, I do have to clip these ties apart. You're no longer married, you're apart. Okay, so here's my mask. Now I'm gonna decide that this is the top of my mask. I'm just deciding that right now. And I know these white parts are gonna stick out. So on top of this, I'm gonna put my ties. And I like, oh, this one's got a little place where the stitching didn't go all the way. So easy to happen. Just fix it here right now. Just fix it right now. Okay, super. Trim, snip, snip. Don't cut your tie while you're at it. Okay. All right, here's the top. I like my, this is not critical, but I like my seams to go down. So I'm going to take each tie and I'm just going to sew it into the corner so it's poking out at a 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to sew it a little bit, a couple stitches on either side of the tie, and this does not have to be snipped perfectly. Now I'm going to go down to the bottom, I'm going to add this one in, and I'm going to make my seam at the bottom. So the top clean part is going to be facing towards the top. Once again, stick that in at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to go to the other side. All right, so if this one is going down, this is still the top, so this one's going to go down. Once again, this one's going down. And just sort of hanging off at the corner at a 45-degree angle right in the middle. And I'm going to just, and basically what we're doing is we're machine basting those in place so we can do what we need to do in a few minutes. I didn't separate these two, they're still together. Let's get them separated. Okay. My seam on my tie is headed downward. It's at a 45-degree angle. I'm going to machine baste the last one in place. Okay, so now we have all of our ties in place. Now at this stage, you might want to pin the other side of your mask to this side, but you don't have to. So I like to start at the bottom. So here's the bottom, and I carefully place this piece so that the right sides are facing each other. And I'm just going to start, got that lined up perfectly, top and bottom. And I'm going to start about a third of the way, and I'm going to make my seam allowance here about 1/4 of an inch. And here's the critical part as I go along. I don't want to stitch my ties into the wrong spot, so I make sure my ties are poking out at this 45-degree angle. And I'm going to line this up, and I'm just going to hold it with my hands, but you could pin these together if you had any concerns. And I'm going to slow down my machine because it's on super fast. I'm just going to go slower, and I get to that corner. I'm going to estimate about where 1/4 inch is, and then I'm going to just pivot my fabric, and now I'm going to line this section up. Once again, I'm going to push my ties out of the way so that I don't stitch my ties down in the wrong spot. Make sure my ties are poking inward at a 45-degree angle. Okay, stopping about 1/4 inch away from the edge. Pivot my fabric, making sure my fabric is lined up. I'm making sure my ties are poking out the bottom. I'm going to go across. Okay, I'm getting close to this tie. I want to make sure it's inside the mask. poking out the bottom, and laying flat right here, laying flat right here at a 45-degree angle. It's pretty bright. I'm gonna head back a little bit. See what I'm doing. About a 1/4 inch from the end, pick up my foot, pivot my fabric. All right. Make sure my ties are poking out the bottom, that they're laying flat against the fabric at a 45-degree angle. Okay, now we're back at the bottom. All my ties are hanging out at the bottom in the middle, and this is flat still at a 45-degree angle, and I'm going to go about a 1/3 of the way, like I did on the other side. Go back and forth and stop. Okay, back to the ironing place. Back to the ironing place. Okay, here we go. Here's my 2 sides. Here's my ties all poking out. And I take this whole thing and gently turn it inside out with my hole now still at the bottom. I can even take my little ties and give them a little tug, and that helps me pull all my corners out. And now, look, here's my basic mask. So this is a little bit tricky. We're going to press it, but in order to make sure that the front fabric and the back fabric line up perfectly, we're just going to kind of finger press it to make sure that looks perfect. And we'll go to the sides and kind of finger press it. I'm going to grab my iron, and I'm going to go right on top of my finger pressing here. Okay, and pull my ties out. I'm gonna make sure this is completely finger pressed so I don't have a big bunch of it poked inside, and make it line up and poke out. I worry about this hole at the end. I do all of the edges before I worry about that hole at the bottom. So see, I'm kind of rolling this fabric, pulling it out, pushing it with my fingernails so it's completely lined up. Are my ties not perfectly sticking out at an angle? I don't worry about that at this point, as long as they're sticking out. Okay, one more side. Okay, now, all right, so now I look at this part I've got open here, and I just reach in here, and I just kind of press the bottom about a 1/4 inch, and then I take my top, and I just try to line those up perfectly. All right, and then I press that against each other. So now they're perfectly mushed together, and we're just gonna top stitch on the top of this. So we're almost to the end, but we gotta put some pleats in this guy. So what I do is I take this piece and I fold it over. Oh, here's a little wrinkle there. I'm gonna iron that little wrinkle. And I just fold this over about 1 1/8 inches, and then I put a crease in there. And then I fold this side up about 1 1/8 inches. And I press a crease in there. And I take the whole thing and fold it in half. And press a crease at the half. Okay. Now, going back to the machine, we're going to do our top stitching and put our pleats in all at once. I'm not going to do a special step for the pleats. I'm just going to make them part of my sewing process. So here's the hole. I want to get that hole taken care of. So I'm going to sew across the bottom first. So I come right up here in the corner onto my tie, and now I'm like try to sew about a 1/16 of an inch close to the edge. So forward and back a couple stitches, and then I'm sewing. I don't want to get off the edge, but I want to sew really close to the edge. This is top stitching. All the way out. to the end. Pick it up. Now there's probably two ways you could do this. You could probably just do all your top stitching and come back and do your pleats, but I'm going to do the pleats all at once. So I know this is the bottom here at the top of my machine. So I'm going to take this next pleat, where that pleat is, and I'm just going to cross it over about 1/4 inch. I'm just going to kind of finger press it in place, and then I'm going to very carefully top stitch. I don't want to catch that with my presser foot, so I got to kind of pick up my presser foot and slowly, slowly, slowly grab that pleat I just made. And before I go any further, I'll pick up my presser foot. I'm going to make the next pleat. I don't want it to be on top of that pleat, but I can feel that if I just go up there about 1/4 inch, I'm right next to the pleat I just made. Very carefully. This is tricky to do because you're going against the machine. Okay, once I get the second pleat under, pick up my presser foot and make another pleat about 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch. Carefully, carefully go on top of that. Okay. Alrighty. I go all the way across the top now. I'm top stitching across the top. Nothing special up here. Smooth sailing. So I get to the corner. I'm about that 1/8 of an inch from the edge of this edge. Carefully, carefully. Now, before I go any further, now my pleats are going to go down. So instead of pushing my pleat up like this time, I'm sticking it under, because it's going to match up with the pleat on the other side. So you can look at the other side, and now the pleats are going to go down. It's going to be easier to sew them down. Hold that with my finger. As soon as I grab that pleat, pick up my presser foot, and now I've got my next one. I'm going to tuck that under this time instead of tucking it over, which I did on the other side. As soon as I've got that one grabbed by my needle, I'm going to tuck this one under. I'm going to go down to the edge. I get to the corner, back and forth a couple times. Okay, we're done. All we have to do now is go through and carefully clip any random whiskers on the mask, and we are through. There's the mask. It's worn with the pleats down, or if you turn it over, you can turn it over and wear it with the pleats down. Oops, like this. And I recommend washing them in a lingerie bag and hanging them to dry. This one's going to my nephew, so I know it's never going to get washed in a lingerie bag, but I will tell him to hang it up to dry. All right, it's about 30-minute process.